Hi, welcome back to Comic Book Emergency Room Show. I'm your host, Dr. Kleb. This is a show where we take characters who have been wrongfully adapted into live action, from movies to shows, and we adapt it correctly so it's comic book reasonable, not too dull or too silly, and it's in-universe reasonable for everyone, and the suit is enjoyable for everybody. Any pictures or videos or panel stacks or articles, anything you see that is not owned by me and is owned by the respective companies and creators and whatnot. Today on our itinerary, we will research his comic book origin, and then we research the film origin, and you know how it is. These are from me at this point. And I forgot to do the one last thing. Today's victim, Hawkeye. This one's not going to be too different than the other ones we've already done, but when it comes to Hawkeye, I'm not going to be focusing on the TV show, Hawkeye TV show, and that's only because his costume in that at the very end is comic book accurate. I just don't like that suit because his original form is what I think should have been. His suit was never adapted into live action. They just kind of skipped it and went immediately to the Agent Hawkeye, and so there are some characters. Okay, I can tell he's already ready, so let's just dive right into it. So the first comic that he appears in is Tales of Suspense, number 57, 1964. And in his origin, him and his brother run away together, and their parents both died in a car crash originally. And after living in an orphanage, him and his brother join this carnival, and they get trained by this guy called the Swordsman and this guy called Trickshot, who was a bow and arrow type character, and they both taught them to become master archers and fighters and stuff. But eventually, Clint learned that Swordsman was stealing money, and Swordsman beat the hell out of him, and eventually, in the Tales of Suspense or whatever, he becomes the world's greatest marksman at this other circus. It looks like he jumped around circuses, and eventually there was this character, Iron Man, who comes in and tries to save this crowd of people who are in danger, and so it takes the attention away from Hawkeye, and so he becomes a villain trying to get at Iron Man for a little bit, and he joins the Black Widow, which at that time she was a villain still for the Russians, and he fell in love with her, and he eventually went on. She gets like injured or something, and he goes through many missions with her, and she gets injured, and she thinks she dies, disappears, and then he just basically breaks into the Avengers Mansion one day and beats up Jarvis, and I guess he rescues Jarvis and his mother from a mugger, but I'm pretty sure he tied him up as well, and then was like, okay, I want to be a hero, I don't want to be a villain anymore, basically, and then he joins the Avengers. So, but then there's another version where he had like an abusive parent. They weren't in an orphanage, and his father was very abusive, and they beat him and his brother, which is horrible. And then his father dies in a car crash due to his long drinking, and they were sent to foster homes. Okay, so and then they go to the circus. Yeah, but in that version, his brother gets involved with like all these like crime. He gets involved with criminals and stuff, and so he loses connection with his brother Barney. And the character Trickshot, who teaches him how to use it, he eventually becomes a villain for Hawkeye. And Hawkeye eventually joins the Avengers. He is just trying to become a hero. So I think it's interesting that in the Marvel movie, first movie, he was a villain, kind of, like, cause the Loki. And so, he went on to be the Hawkeye that we know. Several different suits. He went through several suits. So in this movie version, he's just kind of like an agent. And he was an agent that worked with his wife, which was Mockingbird. I guess she went under the name Mockingbird. So Mockingbird and Hawkeye were agents together. And then eventually, I'm guessing she got pregnant and she stopped being Mockingbird, and so it was just Hawkeye. Then the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. sent Hawkeye after Black Widow. And then he saw potential in Black Widow. Instead of killing her, he saved her life. And then they went on several missions together until you meet him in the Thor movie. Very first cameo that he has. He appears in the Thor movie, ready to shoot a blow, an arrow right at Thor, waiting on Phil Coulson's orders. And he gets the name Hawkeye because he's very skilled in archery. A character like Hawkeye is interesting because unlike in the movie, so in the movie he has this whole family, and he's like a family man, and then in the comics he is just a solo. He's a single bachelor guy, and he's a master archer, marksman, expert, martial artist, hand-to-hand combat. He's even gone under aliases such as Golden Archer, Goliath, Ronin. It even says at one point, I don't know if that's right, it says that he's gone under code names such as Captain America, which I don't know that one. That's probably right. And then also he was once the host of Carnage. That's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. I didn't know that. He's got all this high-tech equipment, armor and bow and stuff. But the thing that's different, okay, in the comics, he is naturally hard of hearing. He's like deaf. And I don't think it was... Okay, so after some research, it looks like he, during a fight in the, with something called the Death Throes villain team, they, have this machine that makes people go crazy and kill each other, and, Hawkeye uses a sonic arrow or something, and, puts it into his mouth, and, it makes him go deaf, apparently. And so he's just been deaf since then. And so he's just had hearing aids put in, which not look as strictly just like him being an agent, him being James Bond with a bow and arrow, basically. But when he was released in 60s, he had an actual costume. The purple, his original costume was blue, had gold, and kind of like a purple, like a violet color to it. And then when he becomes a part of the Avengers, he has a purple and blue that he wears. And so I think that looks much more superhero. But then they're obsessed with churning him. Instead of him just being a superhero, he's an agent. And then his 90s look, they have a lot of different costumes. There's even one where he wears a golden and a red. And they have the Ultimate Universe, which is happened in the 2000s. They started doing that. He became more ninja looking, more tactical, but then they got to a point where they took away his costume. They released everybody's favorite Hawkeye comic book of all time, but he's wearing a t-shirt. And then I'm like, his thing in that comic book is him struggling between his identity as Hawkeye and his identity as Clint Barton. But his identity as Hawkeye is wearing a fucking t-shirt with an arrow on it. You know what I mean? He doesn't have a costume. Any purple shirt, all of a sudden he's Hawkeye. And it's just like, a character's identity is more than a fucking t-shirt. It's obnoxious. But anyways. But I can at least give the movie props for having him eventually turn into Ronin, which did happen. And then he had all these other identities. But I feel like the movies should have moved towards, they should have eventually have him transition into Ronin, because it was like he wore a costume in the beginning, and then eventually he had all these different costumes, all these different colors. Eventually went to the James Bond version, which is the one I call with the with the purple arrow in his chest and the sunglasses, and then they immediately jumped to him as Ronin, and it's like, we're gonna make it make sense. So this version I'm doing, that you see me drawing right here, is I took the outfit of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because this was his appearance in Thor. So I'm going to make a costume for every appearance that he's made, except for the show, because the show is comic accurate. I just don't want to fucking draw that suit. I hate that version, and it's just kind of lazy, in my opinion. You know, it's he's going into battle. He's fighting the most powerful beings in the universe, and you know, he's not Hulk. He can't just walk out there with no armor on. He has to have clothing. He is a human being. He doesn't have powers. His ability is solely based on his skills alone, and him being really good, never missing, is something that he built up. It wasn't something that he just like was born with. Like he's not a mutant or anything. So this version costume I'm making is a costume where they said he was in part of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I noticed when I looked up the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. costumes, like uniforms, are blue, and then they had the insignia of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on the shoulder. And I also try to throw in like a more like a classical look, like a 1960s look, I guess. But I mean that's when he was like introduced, but with the purple and the blue was kind of iconic. Like he looked like an Avenger, and I feel like if he's out there and he doesn't have a costume on, he's just out there with sunglasses. You know, he's not really. He doesn't look like an Avenger. He just looks like a character that would appear in someone else's comic book. It looks like, and in the movie it's even worse. He doesn't have any colors to insignia purple at all. So in the show, where all of a sudden she's like putting him all this purple on because she wants to be like Hawkeye, doesn't really make sense because he's never worn purple ever in the past. All of his other suits throughout all the films, none of them are purple. There was even a color where it was like red, and he doesn't wear red. Maybe he wore red like one time. His brother, Trickshot, which Barney becomes the next Trickshot, he wears red. Alright, and Trickshot, you know, he just looks like a fat version of him, basically, the original Trickshot. And so this version I'm doing is kind of like an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. outfit. And yeah, it's a Thor cameo when he first pops in. It's the first time you ever see him. It should be a really cool moment, but instead you're just like, oh, who's this guy with a bow and arrow in a shield facility? You know, they have all these weapons, but then a guy with a bow and arrow pops up. If he had a costume, an actual costume to perform his presence, like, boof, you could be like, oh my god, who is this guy? You know, this guy works for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, they have people like this. I think it would be a lot more eye-opening rather than just a guy wearing all black all the time. Basically, James Bond with a bow and arrow, and that's what they act like. It's unfortunate because the character Hawkeye has suffered from ridicule, and it's not just like him in the comic book. They're always making fun of him because he's just a human, and he constantly has to prove himself in order to be an Avenger. And it's like his character, where he had a full costume, he looked a lot more. He was even a little more menacing, you know, with the purple and the blue, because he looked like he was a masked vigilante, which that's what he's supposed to be. You know, he's supposed to be like a masked Avenger. And I feel like the reason why in the 2000s they went with the James Bond look, where he's just like a guy wearing a sleeveless shirt, and he just wears like sunglasses sometimes, and he barely even wears like any gear, and he just, you know, he's out here getting deaf, he's getting marks all over him. He even gets shot in one of the movies. If he was wearing fucking armor, that wouldn't have happened. You know, you can't just walk out into battle fighting gods and monsters with a fucking t-shirt on. You know, it's like anybody could walk in, and if they're just a little good at the bow and arrow, they could just be like, oh, I'm Hawkeye now. You know, and that's not the thing. Like, he's Hawkeye. And the reason he's Hawkeye is because of his origin. You know, and his costume is supposed to reflect that. And he was a part of the circus originally, so it's not crazy to assume that he would wear this bright colored costume because it was to entertain the circus, right? But unfortunately, Hawkeye is one of those characters where he suffered ridicule because of a lot of people don't really know how to adapt a character into live action like this. And I get it. You know, he's very bright. He has a lot of bright colors on him. He wears this flashy mask that kind of has these wings that come off like Wolverine or Batman or something. And it's because it's supposed to resemble the hawk, right? Those are the wings, and they come off of his eyes and go up to his head, kind of like that. And it is a tactical look, but it's like a fictional tactical. You know what I mean? Like it's tactical in a sense where if he were in the medieval times, that's probably what he would wear. But because it's modern day and he's wearing that, it's like, oh wow, you know, he's like, it almost kind of resembles like chainmail, I would say, like his like costumes in like the 60s, or the blue and the purple. because I'm pretty sure archers also had to go into battle with armor. So it's not crazy to assume. But I think people are just afraid to adapt bright colors, which we know. When in doubt, the companies will always go black. They will always just put them in a black t-shirt and pants, and they will say that's a good costume. You know, like the Blade effect, where they just like it worked with Blade because that's how Blade's character works. Clinton Barton should not be going out into battle and wearing all black. You know, it just doesn't look right. And it's like you can do the colors, right? You don't have to be afraid of the colors. Don't be afraid to put any sort of creative look in there. You know, like I added the one arm where I notice he does that a lot. He has all these arm, a lot of different costume designs for one arm is completely covered in like this protective leather, and then the other arm is completely exposed but has these little bands to protect him from, you know, accidentally getting himself, which makes sense. So I added the bands and just a lot of other random stuff. The suit I eventually ended up with was a suit where, to reflect his original appearance, and so in the original appearance he wore the blue and the black, which it looks blue, but in the comic book way, blue is actually black, and sometimes purple is black. But it's clear here that his blue was meant to be black, and he was just supposed to wear like a light blue, yellow, and that was a villain when he was a villain for Iron Man. And so I kind of made that, I was trying to find a way to put that suit in there somewhere to just a callback to his original costume. And I figured the perfect place to do that was in the movie when Loki mind controls him using the Mind Stone. He could, because Loki, you know, because the Asgardians, they can kind of like use magic to change their appearance. And so I figure when he goes the mind, you know, he changes his outfit that he's wearing into more like an Asgardian type look, which is why the gold makes sense in that scene. That's why it would make sense if you put it there, if you gave him that costume. So as soon as he touches him, bing, and then this suit forms on him, and you could be like, well, why do we have to have his suit change in order to prove that he's mind controlled? It's like, you know, they did it with his eyes, but I just feel like it's more aesthetically pleasing if you show a physical change, like his entire costume has changed to reflect his new personality that Loki has kind of opened up for him. And it has like a dark, with the dark black and with the dark blue and the purple there, the pinkish stuff to reflect his original suit, but then with the gold, it's like to reflect his Asgardian. Like, this is probably what Loki would imagine for him. In universe, that's why it would make sense. In the comic book, it's just because he joined the circus, and having a gold arrow and a gold bow and a gold sash looks really cool in the circus, but it doesn't really make sense to do it in the movie, so that's how you can make it make sense. It's just Loki is Asgardian, so everything gold is Asgardian. And so when in my mind, when he mind controls him, this would be the perfect chance to use that suit. And that's kind of what I did. So that suit that he wears, I call it the Loki mind controlled suit. Act 1, he's the villain for the Act 1 in the Avengers film. And so I figured that would be a good suit for Act 1 when he's evil, because it's like to reflect him in the comics. When he first appeared, he was a bad guy, so you get a little taste knowing that he's in the universe in the Thor movie, but then when you get to the Avengers film, you're like, yes, he's going to be in this film because he's an Avenger. So it kind of is a callback to his original origin. So the suits that I went with here, I've just been going one for each film, and so I figured at the point when Black Widow turns him back into his normal form. So in the Avengers movie, I remember there was a moment where Captain America was talking to Phil Coulson. When he came back, they were like, "Oh, we made a new costume for you," and he's like, "Aren't this like, isn't my original costume a little old-fashioned?" And Phil Coulson's basically like, "I made an updated version for you." And so I was like, "Oh, okay, so Agent Coulson has the ability to like have suits made for characters, or maybe he makes it himself." He just like put in some design ideas, I think it was. And so I think it would be cool for not only Cap to have an Agent Coulson like kind of like inspired costume, but to have Hawkeye have a costume similar to Captain America's, to be like, Cap's not the only person they made a costume for, because in the movie it was just like, oh, Phil Coulson had ideas for Cap, but maybe, we all know that Agent Coulson, he's a nerd for Captain America, but he also has a superhero working for him. Okay, and so I think when he comes back to being, when Bart comes back from being mind controlled, they all kind of come together over their grief for Agent Coulson, who helped all the Avengers in his own way, throughout all the movies at that point. And so I think he should wear a suit that was like, I would say designed by Agent Coulson, but I wrote it like that, but just to be like same as Cap, so Cap's not alone. And so I wanted to have a suit that would look like a more iconic Avengers debut like appearance, and so I just went with the classic blue and purple. No other colors really besides like a little bit of black. It's like you can put black on a costume when you're like, I have no problem with putting black on a costume. It's just, I think some people do it as overkill. They'll make a costume completely black, and here's the thing. It's the situation, I think, that matters when making an outfit. And so this is his first appearance, technically, debuting as Hawkeye. It's like him officially being in the movie, teaming up with the Avengers. Before this, he had one little cameo where he worked as an agent, and then in the Avengers first act, he was also an agent, but for Loki. And so at this point, he's officially the hero known as Hawkeye, and so he should have a very pronounced H. His ears should be a little bit more pronounced, and just gave him an overall Agent Coulson designed outfit based off of Captain America's outfit, and which has like a little bit of tactical, and it has more lines on it, which is I used Captain America's outfit in the Avengers movie to make this costume. So when it comes to this next outfit, this movie, Age of Ultron, when he appears in Age of Ultron, they kind of give him like a coat, like a real long coat. I think it's because when he first appears and he's wearing it, he's like in a wintry setting, which makes sense. But then I feel like he could wear that for the intro, because my idea was that in the Age of Ultron, each character has a suit made by Tony, basically. There's a Tony design, like he builds a magnet for one of Cap's gloves so he can pick up the shield easier. He builds like pants for Hulk so he's not naked. He builds those, I'm pretty sure he's the one that built those little electric shooters for Black Widow that she uses, the ones that light up her whole costume. Every character has something Iron Man made for them specifically. Fucking War Machine appears in the movie, which that was made by Iron Man, right? So everybody's got a suit to reflect Iron Man's design. And so Hawkeye, being a beloved member of the Avengers, why doesn't he have a suit? Why is he out there getting shot and almost dying? And I think him being shot out there, he should maybe wear something like that in the beginning, where I don't have a problem with that, but it's like after he gets shot and almost dies, Tony should be like, okay, so here's the thing to help protect you from, the environment. And so I had an idea where I was like, Tony builds a specific thing for each character. So he builds the stretchy pants for Hulk, so he can form. He builds the magnets for Cap. He builds the electrical shooters for Black Widow. I don't know what he does for Thor. I don't think Thor really needs anything, because he's already, but it's like, Hawkeye is human. And so I figured maybe he gives him like some like protective armor, like he gives him a suit that helps protect his body, and then also makes it more agile. But at the same time, he could have like an arrow that has like a laser point on it, and it's like more fancy. And he has lenses over his mask, which allow him to be protected from being mind controlled, which did happen eventually in the movie. And so I think, the same events can happen where she tries to go control him, but then he just like hits her over the head with an arrow. It can still happen, but when she tries to do it to him, he's wearing a helmet that protects him from being mind controlled because that was a big problem for him in the past. And so he would want that made for him and protects him against sonar blasts and makes it so he can't be mind controlled because the lenses, But that was just my idea. It took me a while to come up with something. You don't always have to do that, But for his character, that would make sense. He was very paranoid about being mind controlled throughout all their films. Beyond that, whether it was the government telling him what to do, trying to control his mind and life, or if it was some evil god trying to fuck with his mind, Barton was very paranoid about people mind controlling him. So I figured Tony could build something for him like that. And that's what I came up with. You don't have to do the same thing that I did. Of course, that's just all I could think of. And then, trick arrows. You could do trick arrows, which they didn't really do in that movie. They didn't really release the trick arrow idea until, like, the show. I guess a little bit in Civil War, but not really. Just, like, explosives. That's kind of like a given with that. But that's the idea behind this costume. Is that it's just like a Tony suit built for him. Because he builds a suit for Spider-Man, for Cap. He builds everybody's suits. And so I was like, Hawkeye should have something. Shouldn't be just out there naked. Yeah. So the thing about this last suit, and you're probably going to be like, are you out of your mind when you see the suit? So this suit is actually entirely based off, almost exactly based off, the Ultimate version of Hawkeye. And in the Ultimate Universe, everything's supposed to be super edgy and darker. But the reason I chose this suit specifically for Civil War is because I figured he needed a nice segue into hints that he would one day be Ronin. Because if you know the comics, you know that it's inevitable. He'll one day pick up all these identities, as all these other characters, like I was mentioning before. He was previously Captain America. He was even Carnage at one point. He was Goliath. He was the dare I say Golden Archer, and Captain America. Well, anyways, he becomes Ronin, and that's his most memorable role. And Ronin, they kind of had it backwards, where when he became Ronin, there was a Ronin before him, and it was Echo. She was Ronin, and then he takes over for her, and then she becomes Echo. It's this whole thing. They kind of did it backwards, where it was like he was Ronin first, and then she becomes her own person. She becomes Echo because of Ronin, which in the show it doesn't really make sense, because I just want to mention this, that I think it's kind of funny, where the result of him murdering her father, she goes after him because he murdered her father, but then he's like, hey, I may have murdered your father, but it was the Kingpin who wanted, he was the one that told me to do it. And so she's like, the Kingpin, and just hates him forever. Barton is redeemed. It's just like, I don't understand that, because he really is the one that killed her father in the show, I mean. But anyways, the reason why I had this idea for this costume, is because in the movie, it's kind of like he's the first person to say he's retired, and it's assuming that all the other costumes in the past, the ones that I made, are all owned by Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or they're owned by Tony, or just they're in a vault and they belong to the Avengers. And so I figured this would be his very first hint, that when you see him, you're like, oh, he's kind of slowly turning into this ninja character, which would be Ronin, of course. So when you see him in Ronin, it's not crazy to be like, oh, I guess I should have seen that coming. It's a cool little hint that you don't really need to tell anybody, but they look at it and they go, wow, it's the edgiest version yet. And I had the idea that his mask could possibly come down and be like a scarf, just because to have scenes where he's talking to people, I figured that'd be cool. But yeah, this is kind of like a extreme tactical look where it's just, buckles in all crazy places, kind of like he made it himself. And there's a hint of purple to kind of hint that he's transitioning from Hawkeye to, maybe the Hawkeye name has been taken by authorities and stuff. And so like they were taking away Captain America's shield, they were taking away Falcon's suit. It's like all the Avengers shit belongs to the government now, and so maybe he starts like changing, which is kind of like why he looks so different. But also, I took this idea from his Ultimate appearance, and I kind of just based it off of that. And yeah, that's just kind of why I went with this look. It's a good transition into him being Ronin. So it's like he goes from being his iconic look in the Avengers movie to the Age of Ultron, super tech look, and then now he's into his very almost nomad sort of vigilante look. And so now we go into each scene, which with these scenes I chose each scene that he appears in the movie. And so in the Thor cameo, it's the scene where he's about to shoot Thor with an arrow, and Phil Coulson tells him to wait because he wants to see. That's that scene. And then I have the Avengers is when him versus Black Widow, and then Avengers debut where he's wearing the Avenger suit. And so I have 5 drawings here, but it's just I just think that his character should have been wearing this the whole time, because he's the only character that just doesn't look like he belongs. I'm so sorry if you hear humming in the background. That's this fucking neighbor that won't stop mowing his goddamn lawn while I'm trying to do my shit. Anyways, fucking this guy, I swear to God. So I just feel like he's been kind of robbed of the superhero thing. Like you could have made so many things on him. Like they made action figures, and it's just him like wearing black, and I'm like, that's not Hawkeye, all right. Yeah, so I just think that Hawkeye was robbed of his opportunity to look like a cool hero, and people that know him from the comics, before the 2000s, writers came along and said, hey, let's destroy his iconic look and make him look like any action hero ever, and they kind of ruined that, and I just want to bring back the original thing that made him look cool in the first place. And what they chose is way too tactical for me, and it's like, I know in the Hawkeye show it is accurate, it just sucks. And that just goes to prove that even comic book characters can be affected by the movie drama, where people look at a character and they say, oh, it's too silly, and so they make him so dull that the character is left behind. And I really do feel like that's happened with Hawkeye. They just looked at him and they just said, he's got way too many colors, he's way too bright, how are we going to ever bring him to live action? And what it is, it's corporate. It's like they're afraid, they're scared to even try it, because it could anything to destroy their flow of money. But you kind of just have to like go with your gut, and you have to be like, is this suit look too silly? Does it look really cool? Does it look too dull? Because too dull is a bad fucking thing. If it's okay if you're in an action film and a character's wearing tactical and they're just like, nobody knows who that is because it's a movie. These characters have history to them, and giving them their comic book form is the most respectful thing to do. Completely stripping away everything and putting on a black shirt and with an arrow on it is downright disrespectful to the character. It's like some people, as I said before, people put their heart into these characters. They put points behind them. The reason why he has the wings on his face is to be like, oh, he's got the eye of a hawk, right? And so they're not going to give him giant fucking bird wings, because that wouldn't make sense. So they give him an archer's mask that kind of has wings on the face. Perfect place to put it. It looks really cool. But then they completely rip away the design. They rip away the meaning behind it. The reason why you even make that, is what matters. And, some people are too scared. And when they make a movie, they just decide, put him in all black, make him an agent. Fuck it. Erase everything. Like there's no mention of Barney, of his brother. No mention of Trickshot. No mention of the swordsman isn't even introduced until the end. And he doesn't wear purple ever. And so when Kate Bishop pops in and she's like wearing purple, and she's like, You know, she even makes a costume for him. Like she draws his iconic costume, and he goes, "Oh, that's too silly." He has become a joke of his own character. Like that isn't even Hawkeye. That's like John Barton, because the character should not feel uncomfortable wearing his costume. He should feel like it's not a joke, right? In his universe, that makes sense, right? And him wearing this costume, but I want to remind people again, he lives in a world where people wear onesies and they fight fucking monsters in space. All right? It's not crazy to assume that he would have an outfit from the circus. Kind of fits right in, actually, you know. And I mean, it's like if you could make Falcon's costume comic accurate in the Falcon of the Winter Soldier, you know, then you could do it with Hawkeye. But Hawkeye was a missed opportunity. I feel like everybody just made a joke of him, and just because he's human, and that's always been the case. It's always because he's human, and it's always because, well, why does he need a costume? You know, it's like he's proven his worth. You know, he's like the bullseye of good guys. And anyways, this is what I came up with, and thank you for tagging along on our adventure to cure the comic book live action world. Thank you for watching.